She's just a farmer's daughter. She doesn't belong at Westfield Academy. The arrogant principal's words still hung in the air when a sleek private jet touched down on campus the next morning. His jaw dropped as the elegant woman who stepped out introduced herself. "I'm Lily's mother, and we need to talk about your decision. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." Westfield Academy stood tall and imposing against the clear blue September sky, its red brick Georgian façade and perfectly manicured lawns, a testament to 2 centuries of privilege and exclusivity. Wrought iron gates bearing the school's crest, a shield with crossed quills, and the Latin motto, Excellentia Per Privilegium, excellence through privilege, guarded the entrance to what many considered the finest preparatory school in Nitu, the northeast. The prestigious private school had educated generations of future senators, CEOs, celebrities, and business magnates. A fact that headmaster Richard Harrington, Ed.D. from Harvard, never tired of mentioning during his twice-monthly tours for prospective parents. At 57, with salt and pepper hair and perpetually pursed lips, Dr. Harrington had overseen Westfield's rise in the national rankings during his 15-year tenure, largely by being extraordinarily selective about which families were deemed Westfield material. Monday morning, sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows of his wood-paneled office, illuminating walls adorned with framed photographs of Dr. Harrington alongside famous alumni, certificates from prestigious educational associations, and an oil painting of the school's founder, Wellington Westfield III. The antique grandfather clock in the corner ticked solemnly, marking the time for his 9:30 appointment, an application interview he'd been dreading since it had been scheduled. Dr. Harrington straightened his tailored navy blazer and adjusted his red and blue striped Westfield tie as his assistant, Mrs. Caldwell, knocked softly before opening the heavy oak door. "The Sullivans are here, sir," she announced with a hint of uncertainty in her voice. "Send them in," he replied with a practiced smile that didn't reach his eyes. "And perhaps have maintenance ready afterward," he added in a lower tone. "I suspect there might be mud." Thomas Sullivan entered first, his 6-foot frame making the grand office seem momentarily smaller. Despite his obvious attempt to dress for the occasion in a clean button-down shirt and pressed slacks, Dr. Harrington immediately noted the man's calloused hands, sun-weathered skin, and the slight awkwardness with which he carried himself in such formal surroundings. Behind him came his daughter, Lily Sullivan, a slender 15-year-old with intelligent hazel eyes and brown hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She wore a modest blue dress that, while clean and neat, clearly hadn't come from the boutiques that most Westfield parents frequented. "Good morning," Dr. Harrington said, remaining seated as he gestured to the leather chairs across from his massive mahogany desk. "Please make yourselves comfortable." Thomas Sullivan sat with the carefulness of someone who rarely encountered furniture this expensive. "Thank you for seeing us, Dr. Harrington. We really appreciate the opportunity to—" "Yes, well," the headmaster interrupted, reaching for Lily's application folder. "Let's get right to it, shall we? My schedule is quite full today." He made a show of flipping through the pages, though he had already reviewed them and made his decision. Lily clutched a worn portfolio of academic achievements to her chest, her knuckles white, but her gaze steady and observant. She seemed to be taking in every detail of the office, from the awards on the wall to the subtle expressions on the headmaster's face. "Ms. Sullivan," Dr. Harrington finally said, glancing up with barely concealed disdain, "while your academic credentials are adequate, I'm afraid Westfield Academy maintains certain standards that extend beyond mere test scores." He emphasized the word mere, as though straight A's and perfect standardized test scores were somehow trivial. Thomas Sullivan leaned forward, a hint of pride in his voice. "Sir," My daughter has been the top student at Oak Ridge High for 3 consecutive years. Her environmental science project won the state competition, and she's been taking advanced placement courses and college-level classes online since she was 13. The headmaster's eyes narrowed as they drifted to Mr. Sullivan's boots on his antique Persian carpet. Despite being cleaned, they still bore the unmistakable signs of work on a farm. A small speck of dried mud had fallen onto the intricate pattern of the rug, and Dr. Harrington fought the urge to call for immediate cleaning. Yes, I'm sure she performed admirably at her rural school, he replied, with a dismissive wave of his hand. However, Westfield students come from backgrounds that prepare them for the level of sophistication and networking expected here. Our alumni go on to Ivy League universities and prestigious careers. We must ensure all admitted students can keep pace with such an environment. Lily sat quietly, her hands trembling slightly, but her posture remained poised as the headmaster continued his assessment. Furthermore, our tuition is quite substantial, Dr. Harrington said with a tight smile, adjusting his gold cufflinks. I notice you've applied for financial assistance, but I must inform you that our scholarship funds are extremely limited and reserved for candidates with exceptional circumstances or connections to our donor network. The implication was clear. Farmers need not apply. Thomas Sullivan's weathered face reddened slightly. Sir, we're not asking for charity. My daughter deserves this opportunity. Based on her merits, we're prepared to make sacrifices for her education. Mr. Sullivan, the headmaster interrupted, folding his hands on the desk, we have dozens of applicants from families who have supported this institution for generations. Families who understand our traditions, our values, and frankly, our social circles. I simply don't see how your daughter would fit in here. His tone carried the finality of someone not accustomed to having his judgments questioned. The grandfather clock ticked loudly in the moment of tense silence that followed. Lily finally spoke, her voice soft but remarkably clear and articulate. I understand your concerns, Headmaster Harrington. May I ask what specifically about my application was lacking? I'd like to know for future reference. There was no anger in her tone, only genuine curiosity and a maturity that momentarily caught the headmaster off guard. Dr. Harrington seemed briefly discomforted by her composure. Well, it's not any one thing, young lady. Westfield students typically have extensive extracurricular activities, international travel experiences, cultural enrichment, family connections to our alumni network, leadership roles in prestigious organizations. We look for students who will maintain the Westfield legacy and bring appropriate resources and connections to our community. I see, Lily replied thoughtfully, meeting his gaze without flinching. And you've determined I don't have those qualities based on my father's occupation. The headmaster's smile tightened further, lips pressing into a thin line. I've made my decision based on a holistic review of your application, Ms. Sullivan. The committee and I feel you would be better served in an environment more aligned with your background. He stood abruptly, extending his hand to Thomas to signal the end of the meeting. Perhaps the public school in your district would be more suitable. Mrs. Caldwell will show you out. As Thomas and Lily gathered their belongings and walked toward the door, the headmaster heard Thomas whisper to his daughter, "Don't worry, honey. When your mother gets back tomorrow, we'll figure something out." Dr. Harrington gave a dismissive sigh as the door closed behind them. What could a farmer's wife possibly do about his decision? Probably arrive in overalls to plead their case, or offer homemade preserves as a bribe. He chuckled at the thought as he straightened the papers on his desk. He would find out sooner than he expected. Thomas Sullivan held the truck door open for his daughter as they left Westfield Academy's visitor parking lot. The late morning sun illuminated the campus behind them, making the rejection sting even more as they watched other prospective students and their well-dressed parents being greeted with warm smiles by staff members. "I'm sorry, Lilyflower," Thomas said quietly as he climbed into the driver's seat of their weathered Ford pickup. The truck, while meticulously maintained, was nearly 15 years old, a stark contrast to the luxury vehicles filling the Academy's parking spaces. Dr. Harrington had already made up his mind before we even walked through the door. Lily buckled her seatbelt and placed her portfolio carefully on her lap. The folder contained years of perfect report cards, glowing teacher recommendations, certificates from science competitions, and detailed documentation of her independent research projects. She ran her fingers over the cover, which was slightly frayed at the edges from frequent handling. "It's not your fault, Dad," she replied, her voice steady despite the disappointment evident in her eyes. "And it's not mine either. Some people just can't see past appearances." Thomas started the engine, which rumbled to life with a familiar, comforting sound. He glanced at his daughter with a mixture of pride and concern. At 15, she already possessed a wisdom and resilience that surpassed many adults he knew. "Your mother was right," he said with a small smile. "We should have waited until she could join us. She would have intimidated him." Lily laughed softly, some of the tension leaving her shoulders. "Remember when she handled that bank manager who wouldn't approve our equipment loan?" Thomas chuckled as he navigated the truck out of the Academy grounds. That poor man never knew what hit him. By the end of the meeting, he was apologizing to us and offering better terms than we asked for. As they drove away from Westfield, Lily watched the imposing buildings recede in the side mirror. "I really thought my grades and projects would be enough," she admitted quietly. "I thought they'd see past the farmer's daughter thing." "People like Harrington don't want to see past their preconceptions," Thomas said, his weathered hands gripping the steering wheel a little tighter. "Makes their world simpler if they can put everyone in neat little boxes." They drove in thoughtful silence for several minutes, the scenic countryside gradually replacing the manicured suburbia surrounding Westfield Academy. Fields of corn and soybeans stretched out on either side of the road, punctuated occasionally by farmhouses and barns. "What do you think Mom will say?" Lily finally asked, as they turned onto the long gravel driveway leading to their property. Unlike the neighboring farms with their modest houses, the Sullivan residence sat farther back from the road, a beautiful two-story farmhouse with a wraparound porch and restored century-old architectural details. Behind it stood several modern, agricultural buildings alongside the traditional red barn. "You know your mother," Thomas replied with a knowing smile. "She's going to have some choice words for Dr. Harrington, but more importantly, she'll have a plan. She always does." As they pulled up to the house, Lily noticed her father's expression change as he looked at his phone. "Everything okay, Dad?" Thomas nodded, putting the truck in park. "Your mom's flight got moved up. She'll be landing tonight instead of tomorrow morning." "Really?" Lily's face brightened considerably. "I've missed her so much. 3 weeks is too long, even if it was for a good cause." "The foundation work is important to her," Thomas replied, gathering Lily's portfolio and his jacket from the truck. "But I know she's been missing you something fierce. She asked about your interview twice during our call yesterday. Inside there, home, the interior stood in sharp contrast to what most people would expect of a farmer's house. The open-concept living space featured tasteful, modern furniture alongside carefully preserved antique pieces. One wall was dedicated to bookshelves, filled with volumes on everything from agricultural science to quantum physics to classic literature. Another displayed family photographs alongside framed articles and awards, most featuring Lily's mother in various professional settings. Thomas headed for the kitchen, rolling up his sleeves. "How about some lunch before you start on your homework? I think we both need some comfort food after that meeting." Lily nodded, but her attention had been caught by the newest photograph on the wall, her mother standing beside a group of well-dressed dignitaries in front of a rural hospital somewhere in Southeast Asia. The elegant woman in the center of the image, with her confident stance and warm smile, looked nothing like what Dr. Harrington would imagine a farmer's wife to be. "Dad," Lily said suddenly, a spark of determination in her eyes, "I think I need to call Mom before she gets on her flight." Thomas looked up from where he was assembling sandwich ingredients. "Everything okay?" "Everything's fine," Lily replied, a small smile playing on her lips. "I just need to talk to her about something important." Meanwhile, back at Westfield Academy, Dr. Harrington was conducting another interview, this time with the Blackwells, a legacy family whose generous donations had funded the Academy's new Performing Arts Center. Their son, despite mediocre grades and a record of disciplinary issues at his previous school, was practically guaranteed admission. "We're delighted to welcome another generation of Blackwells to Westfield," Dr. Harrington said warmly, shaking hands with Mr. Blackwell, a banking executive whose tailored suit and gold watch screamed old money. "I've already asked our registrar to prepare the enrollment papers." As the Blackwells left his office, Dr. Harrington's assistant, Mrs. Caldwell, entered with a concerned expression. "Sir, I've just received a rather unusual call," she said, her typically composed demeanor slightly ruffled. "Oh?" Dr. Harrington raised an eyebrow, already mentally moving on to the next item on his agenda. "It's about the Sullivan application you rejected this morning," she continued. "Apparently, someone from the Sullivan family has requested permission for a helicopter to land on the campus grounds tomorrow morning." Dr. Harrington stared at his assistant in disbelief before letting out a dismissive laugh. "A helicopter? The Sullivans? That has to be some kind of joke. Probably some farming friend with a crop duster, thinking he can intimidate us." He shook his head. "Deny the request, of course." Mrs. Caldwell shifted uncomfortably. "That's just it, sir. The request didn't come from Mr. Sullivan. It came directly from the FAA, and it's not for a helicopter. It's for a private jet. Apparently, they've already been granted clearance for a temporary landing on the East Field, where the lacrosse team practices." "That's absurd!" Dr. Harrington sputtered, rising from his chair. "Who authorized this? Certainly not the board." "The authorization came from the governor's office, sir," Mrs. Caldwell replied, her voice dropping slightly. "And there's more. The jet in question is registered to Sullivan International Holdings." Dr. Harrington froze, the color draining from his face. "Sullivan International Holdings. Are you certain?" Mrs. Caldwell nodded. "I double-checked, sir. The jet is scheduled to arrive at 9:30 tomorrow morning, and the school has been strongly encouraged to accommodate the request. But that's impossible," Dr. Harrington muttered, more to himself than to his assistant. "Thomas Sullivan is a farmer. I saw his hands, his boots." His voice trailed off as he frantically tapped at his computer keyboard, pulling up a search engine. He typed Sullivan International Holdings and hit enter. The results made him sink slowly back into his chair. Sullivan International Holdings, global leader in sustainable agriculture technology and renewable energy solutions. Founded by Catherine Chen Sullivan, Ph.D., pioneering agricultural scientist and environmental engineer. Current market valuation, $4.2 billion. And there, at the top of the search results, was a photograph of a striking Asian-American woman in her early 40s, elegant, poised, and unmistakably powerful, standing behind a podium at the World Economic Forum. The caption read, "Dr. Catherine Chen Sullivan, CEO of Sullivan International Holdings and founder of the Chen Sullivan Foundation for Rural Education, addresses world leaders on sustainable farming practices." Dr. Harrington's mouth went dry as connections began forming in his mind. Sullivan. Chen Sullivan. The farmer with the academically brilliant daughter. The wife returning from a trip. "Mrs. Caldwell," he said weakly, "please pull me everything we have on Lily Sullivan's application and find out if Catherine Chen Sullivan has any connection to our applicant." As his assistant hurried to comply, Dr. Harrington loosened his tie, suddenly finding it difficult to breathe. In his 20-year career in academic administration, he had made many judgment calls about students and families. But as he stared at the image of Dr. Catherine Chen Sullivan on his screen, he had the sinking feeling that this particular judgment might have been the worst mistake of his professional life. And tomorrow morning at 9:30, that mistake would be landing on his lacrosse field. Dawn broke over Westfield Academy with unusual activity already buzzing across the campus. Maintenance crews had been working since 5 a.m., clearing the east field of equipment and marking a temporary landing zone with bright orange cones. Campus security, reinforced with additional personnel, established a perimeter around the area, their typically relaxed demeanor replaced with alert professionalism. Dr. Richard Harrington had barely slept. After discovering the true identity of Lily Sullivan's mother, he had spent hours researching Dr. Catherine Chen Sullivan, each new detail making him increasingly anxious about the impending meeting. His comfortable worldview, where farmers were just farmers and elites were elites, had been shattered by the revelation that Thomas Sullivan's wife was not only wealthy and powerful, but also internationally renowned. By 8:15 a.m., Dr. Harrington stood before his bathroom mirror, adjusting his tie for the 4th time. He had chosen his finest suit, charcoal grey Italian wool, paired with his Harvard alumni tie and polished Oxford shoes. Dark circles under his eyes betrayed his restless night, despite his attempts to conceal them. His wife, Margaret, appeared in the doorway of their bathroom, coffee mug in hand. "Richard, you look like you're preparing for a firing squad, not a meeting with a parent." "This isn't just any parent," he replied, voice uncharacteristically tight. "Catherine Chen Sullivan sits on advisory boards with cabinet secretaries. She has honorary degrees from MIT and Stanford. 3 years ago, she declined a position in the President's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology because she was too busy with her foundation work." He swallowed hard. "And yesterday I rejected her daughter based on assumptions," Margaret finished for him, her expression softening slightly. "You've always been quick to categorize people, Richard. It's an occupational hazard in your position." "This isn't just an embarrassing social faux pas," he said, checking his watch nervously. "Half the board of trustees has already called me. Apparently, the Chen Sullivan Foundation funds research at most of their companies and universities. Chairman Wilson practically ordered me to fix this immediately, or face consequences." Margaret sipped her coffee thoughtfully. "Then fix it. Admit your mistake and offer the girl admission." "It's not that simple," Dr. Harrington sighed, grabbing his briefcase. "You don't understand the magnitude of—" "I understand perfectly," his wife interrupted. "You misjudge someone based on appearances, and now you're afraid of the consequences. The solution is simple: apologize sincerely and make amends. Catherine Chen Sullivan may be powerful, but she's still a mother concerned about her daughter's education." Dr. Harrington checked his watch again. 8:30 a.m., 1 hour until the jet arrived. "I need to get to campus. The board chairman is meeting me there." As he hurried to his car, his phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Caldwell. "Media vans outside. Main gate. Reporter from Education Today requesting comment on Westfield's special visitor." Dr. Harrington groaned. Of course the media would catch wind of this. A billionaire CEO landing a private jet at a prep school was exactly the kind of story that generated clicks and views. By 9:15 a.m., a small crowd had gathered at a respectful distance from the landing zone. Faculty members whispered among themselves. speculating about the mysterious visitor and why the headmaster looked so unusually rattled. Students pressed against classroom windows with phones ready to capture the unusual event. The board chairman, Maxwell Wilson, a stern-faced former ambassador, stood beside Dr. Harrington, occasionally checking his watch with pointed significance. "I've known Catherine for years through the Global Innovation Forum," Chairman Wilson murmured. "Brilliant woman, completely transformed agricultural technology in developing regions. Her family foundation has funded half the rural education initiatives in the country." He fixed Dr. Harrington with a piercing stare. "And you rejected her, daughter, because her father is a farmer?" "I didn't know who," Dr. Harrington began. "That's precisely the problem," Wilson cut him off. "You didn't bother to know. Did you even read the girl's full application file? Her mother's letter of recommendation was included." Dr. Harrington felt his stomach sink. He had skimmed the application yesterday morning, making assumptions based on the address and occupation listed for the father. When he'd seen the request for financial aid, he'd made even more assumptions without digging deeper. "I saw Sullivan Farm as the address, and you saw what you expected to see," Wilson finished for him. "Thomas Sullivan may work the land with his own hands, but that farm is actually one of the most advanced agricultural research facilities in the country. It's where Sullivan International Holdings tests their sustainable farming technologies before deploying them globally." Before Dr. Harrington could respond, the distinctive sound of jet engines filled the air. Conversation ceased as all eyes turned skyward. A sleek, white Gulfstream G650 with the Sullivan International Holdings logo, a stylized green leaf forming an S, appeared in the clear blue sky, banking gracefully as it approached the improvised landing area. The jet touched down with professional precision, rolling to a stop exactly where the guidelines indicated. For a moment, there was complete silence across the campus as the engines wound down. Then the door opened and a set of stairs unfolded. First to emerge was a woman in a sharp business suit, clearly an assistant, checking the surroundings efficiently before nodding back toward the cabin. Next came Thomas Sullivan, the same man who had sat in Dr. Harrington's office yesterday, in simple clothing. Today, however, he wore a well-tailored suit that, while conservative, was obviously expensive. His transformation was remarkable, standing straighter, moving with quiet confidence, yet still with the same weathered hands and kind eyes. And then Dr. Catherine Chen Sullivan appeared at the top of the stairs. Dr. Harrington had seen photos during his research last night, but they hadn't captured the commanding presence of the woman now surveying the Westfield campus. In her early 40s, with shoulder-length black hair and striking features, she wore a dove-grey suit with a silk blouse, a simple pendant. What appeared to be a jade leaf matching her company's logo was her only jewelry. She carried herself with the natural authority of someone accustomed to both boardrooms and scientific laboratories. Behind her came Lily, wearing a simple but elegant blue dress that complemented her mother's outfit. The family resemblance was unmistakable in their posture and the intelligent assessment in their eyes. As the Sullivan family approached, Chairman Wilson stepped forward with a warm smile. "Catherine, wonderful to see you again. It's been too long since the Geneva conference." Dr. Chen Sullivan returned the smile, clasping his outstretched hand. "Max, thank you for accommodating my rather dramatic arrival. I apologize for the theatrics, but my schedule was already tight with the UN presentation tomorrow." "Not at all," Wilson replied smoothly. "Westfield is honored by your visit." He turned slightly. "May I introduce our headmaster, Dr. Richard Harrington?" Dr. Harrington stepped forward, extending his hand with what he hoped was a professionally neutral expression. "Dr. Chen Sullivan, welcome to Westfield Academy." Catherine Chen Sullivan studied him for a moment, her gaze direct and evaluating. Then she took his hand in a firm, brief handshake. "Dr. Harrington, I believe we have some important matters to discuss regarding my daughter's application. Of course, he replied, his mouth suddenly dry. My office would provide the necessary privacy for... Actually, she interrupted, politely but firmly, I'd prefer to see the campus first. I understand Westfield prides itself on facilities that foster both academic excellence and character development. I'd like to see these facilities for myself while we talk. It wasn't a request. Dr. Harrington nodded quickly. Of course, I'd be happy to show you our campus. As they began walking, students and faculty stared openly at the procession, the board chairman, the headmaster, and the Sullivan family moving across the quad toward the main academic building. Thomas walked beside his daughter with a protective arm around her shoulders, while Dr. Chen Sullivan matched pace with Dr. Harrington, her attention seemingly focused on the campus architecture. Beautiful grounds, she commented. The Georgian buildings have been well preserved. Thank you, Dr. Harrington replied, seizing on the neutral topic. Many of the original structures date back to 1842. We've maintained the historical character while modernizing the interiors for contemporary, educational needs. Dr. Chen Sullivan nodded. A balance of tradition and innovation. Admirable. Then, without changing her conversational tone, she added, rather like my husband's approach to agriculture. Thomas comes from 5 generations of farmers, but he's integrated cutting-edge technology and sustainable practices that have revolutionized crop yields while reducing environmental impact. Dr. Harrington felt the pointed comment like a needle. Dr. Chen Sullivan, regarding yesterday's meeting, I want to express my sincere... Tell me, Dr. Harrington, she interrupted again, stopping to face him directly. What exactly are Westfield's admissions criteria? I'm curious because my daughter ranks in the top 0.1% nationally in standardized testing, has already published research in a peer-reviewed journal at 15, speaks 3 languages fluently, and has developed an agricultural algorithm that's currently being implemented in drought-affected regions of Africa. Her tone remained pleasant, but her eyes held him accountable. Yet somehow these accomplishments were deemed insufficient, because her father's hands bear the marks of honest work, and our address includes the word farm. Around them, faculty members and students had stopped, pretending not to listen while hanging on every word. Dr. Harrington felt a cold sweat forming at his temples. There appears to have been a serious misunderstanding. Had I known the full context of Lily's background... But that's precisely my point, Catherine said, her voice carrying clearly. In the suddenly quiet courtyard. You shouldn't have needed to know who I am or what our family's resources might be. My daughter's achievements should have spoken for themselves. The courtyard had fallen into complete silence. Even the birds seemed to have paused their morning songs as Dr. Catherine Chen Sullivan's words hung in the air. Students who had been pretending not to eavesdrop now openly watched the unfolding drama, many covertly recording with their phones. Dr. Harrington's collar felt suddenly tight against his neck. Perhaps we should continue this conversation somewhere more private, he suggested, gesturing toward the administration building. I don't think that's necessary, Catherine replied with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. After all, educational institutions should be transparent in their values and processes. Wouldn't you agree? The students watching us now might learn something valuable about judgment, fairness, and accountability. Chairman Wilson, sensing the tension, attempted to intervene. Catherine, I assure you that the board takes these concerns very seriously. We pride ourselves on a fair and thorough admissions process. With all due respect, Max, Catherine responded, her tone remaining measured and professional. If that were entirely true, we wouldn't be having this conversation. My daughter's application was dismissed without proper consideration. She turned slightly to include Lily and Thomas in the conversation. When my husband called me last night to explain what happened, I was disappointed, to put it mildly. Lily stepped forward, her composure remarkable for a 15-year-old in such a charged situation. "Mom, maybe we should—" "It's all right, Lily," Catherine said gently. "This is an important teaching moment." She focused again on Dr. Harrington. "You see, Dr. Harrington, my husband and I made a deliberate choice years ago. Despite our resources, we wanted Lily to grow up understanding the value of hard work, the importance of sustainability, and the reality of where food comes from. Thomas manages our research farm not because we can't afford staff, but because he loves the land and believes in the mission of our company." Thomas nodded, standing tall beside his wife. "We could have settled in Manhattan or Silicon Valley. Catherine's work takes her around the world, but we chose rural living deliberately for our daughter's education, the kind that doesn't come from textbooks alone." Dr. Harrington swallowed hard. "I sincerely apologize for my hasty judgment. Had I taken the time to properly review Lily's full application—" "But you didn't," Catherine observed, "and that's the issue at hand. You saw a farmer's daughter requesting financial aid, and you made assumptions about her capabilities, potential, and place in your institution." Around them the crowd had grown. Teachers who had free periods, curious administrative staff, and more students pressed closer, drawn by the spectacle of the headmaster being held accountable so publicly. "The financial aid request," Catherine continued, her voice carrying easily across the courtyard, "was Lily's idea, by the way. We could obviously afford the tuition, but our daughter insisted that any scholarship funds we might receive should be matched by us and donated to support truly disadvantaged students." She looked proudly at her daughter. That was entirely her initiative, to use privilege to create opportunity for others. Whispers rippled through the gathering crowd. Dr. Harrington felt each murmur like a physical blow to his carefully constructed reputation. "Dr. Chen Sullivan," he began again, struggling to regain some control of the situation, "I completely understand your frustration. A mistake was made, and I take full responsibility. We would be honored to offer Lily immediate admission to Westfield Academy with a full merit scholarship." "That's a generous offer," Catherine interrupted, "but I'm afraid you misunderstand the purpose of our visit." She glanced at her husband and daughter before continuing. "We're not here seeking admission for Lily. We're here to ensure that what happened to her doesn't happen to other deserving students who lack the advantage of having a mother who can—" "Land a private jet on your lacrosse field." Chairman Wilson stepped forward again. "Catherine, what exactly are you proposing?" Catherine reached into her briefcase and removed a slim folder. "The Chen Sullivan Foundation has drafted a proposal for Westfield Academy. We're prepared to establish a substantial endowment specifically earmarked for students from rural and agricultural backgrounds who demonstrate academic excellence but lack traditional socio-economic advantages." She handed the folder to Chairman Wilson, who opened it with evident curiosity. His eyebrows rose as he scanned the contents. "This is extremely generous," he said, looking up at Catherine with newfound respect. "The endowment comes with conditions," Catherine continued, turning back to Dr. Harrington. "First, a complete overhaul of the admissions process to include blind first-round reviews where family names, addresses, and occupations are redacted, so applications are judged solely on merit." Dr. Harrington nodded stiffly, aware that refusing such a condition would only confirm the bias he was already trying to deny. "Second," Catherine continued, "mandatory training for all admissions staff on recognizing and countering implicit bias. My foundation will provide experts at no cost to the school." "That seems quite reasonable," Chairman Wilson agreed, still reviewing the documents with growing approval. "And third," Catherine said, her voice softening slightly as she looked at her daughter, "Lily will serve as a student consultant to your admissions committee, providing perspective on how to better evaluate non-traditional applications. Lily looked surprised. "Mum, I didn't know about that part." Catherine smiled at her daughter. "Because I just decided it this morning, watching you handle this situation with such grace. But only if you want to, of course." Thomas placed a supportive hand on Lily's shoulder. "You'd be perfect for it, Lily Flower." Dr. Harrington, seeing a potential path to salvaging both the situation and his career, quickly nodded. "We would welcome Lily's input. Her perspective would be invaluable." Lily considered for a moment, then straightened her shoulders. "I'll do it, but on one condition of my own." She looked directly at Dr. Harrington. "The committee needs to visit rural schools actively, not wait for applications to come to them. There are brilliant students who would never even think to apply to Westfield because they've been told all their lives that places like this aren't for people like them." A spontaneous murmur of approval rippled through the gathered crowd. Even Dr. Harrington had to acknowledge the wisdom in her words. "An excellent suggestion," he conceded. "We'll implement an outreach program immediately." Chairman Wilson closed the folder, visibly impressed. "Catherine, this is a transformative proposal. The board will need to review the details, of course. But speaking personally, I fully support these initiatives." Catherine nodded. "I'm pleased to hear that, Max. Educational equity has always been a cornerstone of our foundation's mission." She checked her watch. "Now, I hate to cut this short, but I have a video conference with our Southeast Asian operations team in 30 minutes. Perhaps we could continue this conversation next week after your board has had time to review the proposal." "Of course," Chairman Wilson replied. "I'll convene a special session tomorrow." As the group began walking back toward the jet, Dr. Harrington found himself beside Lily, slightly separated from the others. "Ms. Sullivan," he said quietly, genuine remorse in his voice, "I owe you a personal apology. I made assumptions that were unfair and unfounded. Your accomplishments are extraordinary by any measure, and I failed to give them the consideration they deserved." Lily studied him thoughtfully before responding. "Dr. Harrington, do you know what my father taught me about judgment?" When he shook his head, she continued, "He says that good judgment comes from experience, but experience often comes from bad judgment. This could be a valuable experience for everyone involved, especially for students who might benefit from the changes." Dr. Harrington blinked, surprised by her maturity and grace. "You're remarkably forgiving." "Not forgiving," Lily corrected him gently. "Forward-thinking. There's a difference." As they rejoined the others near the jet, Catherine was concluding her conversation with Chairman Wilson. "And of course, we'll need to discuss implementing similar programs at other institutions. Westfield could become a model for preparatory schools nationwide." Wilson nodded enthusiastically. "I'll speak with colleagues at Exeter and Andover personally. This initiative could revolutionize private school admissions practices." Catherine turned to Dr. Harrington, extending her hand. "Dr. Harrington, I look forward to working together on these reforms. Sometimes our most uncomfortable moments lead to our greatest growth, both personally and institutionally." He accepted her handshake, recognizing the olive branch being extended. "I appreciate the opportunity to make this right, Dr. Chen Sullivan. Your daughter is an exceptional young woman." "She is," Catherine agreed with evident pride. "And there are many other exceptional young people being overlooked because they don't fit preconceived notions of what excellence looks like. Together, we can change that." As the Sullivan family prepared to board their jet, Thomas paused at the foot of the stairs, turning back to Dr. Harrington with a smile that held no malice. "You know, there's an old farming saying, you can tell the quality of the soil by what grows in it, not by how it looks to the eye." With that parting wisdom, the family ascended the stairs. Catherine and Thomas waved briefly to the assembled crowd before disappearing into the cabin. while Lily lingered a moment longer, surveying the campus thoughtfully before joining her parents. Minutes later, the jet taxied smoothly across the field and took to the sky, leaving behind a transformed Westfield Academy and a headmaster who had learned a valuable lesson about looking beyond appearances. As the crowd dispersed, students and faculty alike discussing excitedly what they had witnessed, Chairman Wilson clapped a hand on Dr. Harrington's shoulder. "Well, Richard," he said with a mix of sternness and encouragement, "it seems we have some work to do. Shall we begin today?" Dr. Harrington nodded, watching the jet disappear into the clouds. "Yes," he replied, surprising himself with his sincerity. "I believe we shall." 1 year later, the autumn leaves created a vibrant tapestry of red and gold. Across Westfield Academy's campus, as students hurried between buildings, the crisp October air filled with lively conversation and laughter. Among them walked Dr. Richard Harrington, observing the bustling activity with a different perspective than he'd held just 12 months earlier. The past year had transformed Westfield in ways he couldn't have imagined that fateful day when Catherine, Jen Sullivan's private jet, had landed on the lacrosse field. The changes were visible everywhere he looked, from the more diverse student body to the newly established Rural Excellence program, housed in what had once been an underutilized administrative wing. Dr. Harrington paused outside the Academy's main hall, where workers were installing a new plaque beside the entrance. The bronze marker read, "Chen Sullivan Scholars Program, recognizing excellence beyond boundaries." He ran his fingers lightly over the freshly cast lettering, reflecting on how close he had come to losing his position after the incident. "It's being unveiled at the gala tomorrow," came a voice behind him. "Mum and Dad are flying in for the ceremony." Dr. Harrington turned to find Lily Sullivan approaching, carrying a stack of books and a tablet. In the year since their first contentious meeting, she had blossomed into one of Westfield's most respected student leaders, though she had ultimately chosen to continue her education at her previous school while serving as a special consultant. "To Westfield's admissions committee, Lily," he greeted her with genuine warmth. "I was just admiring the craftsmanship. How are your parents?" "Busy as ever," she replied with a smile. "Dad's expanding the research programs at the farm. They're hosting 20 agriculture students from developing countries this semester. And Mum's foundation just partnered with the Department of Education on that National Rural Schools Initiative." Dr. Harrington nodded, falling into step beside her as they walked toward the administration building. "The impact of your family's work has been, well, frankly, it's been revolutionary for us." He gestured to a group of students gathered around a bench nearby, a notably more diverse group than would have been seen at Westfield a year ago. "The first class of Chen Sullivan scholars is already changing the culture here for the better." Lily's eyes brightened. Miguel's presentation on innovative irrigation techniques for his family's farm in New Mexico was brilliant, wasn't it? And Sarah's research on rural healthcare disparities is being reviewed for publication. Precisely the kinds of perspectives and talents we were missing, Dr. Harrington acknowledged. "Though I'm still sorry you chose not to enroll here yourself. You would have been a tremendous asset to our student body." Lily adjusted her books thoughtfully. "I appreciate that, Dr. Harrington, but I'm where I need to be. My school might not have Westfield's resources or reputation, but it has heart and community. Besides, I can have a bigger impact working with your admissions committee to identify students from backgrounds you might have overlooked before." They reached the administration building, where a meeting of the newly formed Admissions Reform Committee was about to begin. Dr. Harrington held the door for Lily, noting how comfortably she carried herself in a space that had once intimidated her. "Your mother would be proud of your diplomatic skills," he observed. "You've managed to push for substantial changes without making enemies, a rare talent at any age." Lily laughed softly. "Mum says revolution comes in many forms. Sometimes It arrives on a private jet with dramatic flair, and sometimes it works quietly from within the system. Inside the conference room, the committee members were already assembled, a mix of faculty, administrators, board members, and student representatives. The wall displayed a presentation titled Westfield Outreach Initiative, Year 1 Results. As Lily took her place at the table, Dr. Harrington addressed the group. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that today marks exactly 1 year since the Mitre incident that prompted our institutional self-examination. A few knowing smiles flickered around the table. The story of the farmer's daughter and the private jet had become something of a legend at Westfield, growing more dramatic with each retelling by students. The numbers speak for themselves, he continued, gesturing to the screen where data highlighted the program's success. Applications from rural and agricultural communities have increased by 312% since implementing our outreach program. The blind first-round review process has resulted in a 58% increase in socioeconomic diversity among admitted students. And perhaps most significantly, academic performance and extracurricular achievement metrics have risen across all student demographics. Chairman Wilson, who had supported the reforms from the beginning, nodded with satisfaction. The board is particularly impressed by the retention rates. Initial concerns that students from non-traditional backgrounds might struggle to adapt have proven completely unfounded. If anything, added Dean Martinez, the newly appointed Director of Inclusion, these students have shown exceptional resilience and determination. Their perspectives have enriched classroom discussions and community initiatives in ways we hadn't anticipated. Lily listened to the statistics with quiet pride, remembering her first visit to this very building and how differently she had been received. As the meeting progressed into discussions about expanding the program to include urban, underserved communities, she occasionally contributed insights from her experiences working with applicants, but mostly she observed the genuine enthusiasm with which Westfield's leadership had embraced change. After the meeting concluded, Dr. Harrington asked Lily to stay behind. Once the room had cleared, he sat across from her with an expression of unusual humility. "I wanted to share something with you before tomorrow's gala," he said, removing a small envelope from his jacket pocket. "The board received this letter, and from your mother yesterday." Lily opened the envelope curiously, unfolding a letterhead from Sullivan International Holdings. As she read, her eyes widened slightly. "Mom's endowing a permanent faculty position in rural education studies?" She looked up, surprised. "She didn't mention this to me." Dr. Harrington nodded. "The Catherine and Thomas Sullivan Chair for Rural Educational Equity will allow us to bring in leading scholars to study and develop best practices for identifying and nurturing talent from agricultural communities." He paused, adding with a touch of self-deprecation, "Something I clearly needed schooling in." Lily refolded the letter thoughtfully. "You know, Dr. Harrington, a year ago I was devastated by your rejection. I thought it meant I wasn't good enough." "Nothing could have been further from the truth," he said with genuine regret. "It was my failure, not yours." "Maybe," Lily acknowledged, "but looking back, it led to something much more important than my admission to one school. It created opportunities for dozens of students who might never have had them otherwise." She handed the letter back to him. "Sometimes what seems like rejection is actually redirection to something better." As they walked out of the building together, they passed a wall displaying photographs of the first cohort of Chen Sullivan scholars, 15 students from farming communities across the country whose journeys to Westfield would have been impossible just a year earlier. "Will you be bringing anyone to the gala tomorrow?" Dr. Harrington asked conversationally as they reached the courtyard. Lily smiled. "Actually, yes. My friend Emma from my school. She's the daughter of our local mechanic and has designed an incredible sustainable energy system for rural communities. I thought she should see what's possible when institutions recognize talent wherever it grows." Dr. Harrington nodded appreciatively. "I look forward to meeting her." The next evening, Westfield Academy glowed with lights as luxury vehicles delivered guests to the annual gala, now doubling as the official launch of the Chen Sullivan Scholars Program. Among the sleek cars and chauffeur-driven SUVs, a familiar pickup truck turned into the circular driveway, drawing curious glances from valets accustomed to more prestigious vehicles. Thomas Sullivan emerged in a well-tailored tuxedo, circling to open the door for his wife, Dr. Catherine Chen Sullivan. Resplendent in an elegant emerald gown, from the back seat stepped Lily and her friend Emma, both looking beautiful in formal dresses that Lily's mother had helped them select. As they walked toward the entrance, Dr. Harrington greeted them warmly, having stationed himself at the door specifically to welcome the guests of honor. And their attendees, wealthy donors, board members and influential alumni, watched with interest as he escorted the Sullivan family to their place of prominence. "I must say," Catherine commented quietly to Dr. Harrington, "this is quite different from our last meeting." "Indeed," he agreed with a self-deprecating smile, "though I believe I'm still learning the lesson you taught me that day." The evening proceeded with speeches celebrating the new program. When it was Catherine's turn to address the gathering, she spoke powerfully about potential hiding in unexpected places and the responsibility of privileged institutions to look beyond superficial markers of success. "Excellence doesn't always wear designer labels or arrive with prestigious family names," she told the rapt audience. "Sometimes it has dirt under its fingernails from working the land. Sometimes it speaks with a regional accent or uses practical wisdom rather than academic jargon. Our responsibility as leaders, educators and parents is to recognize it in all its forms." As applause filled the hall, Lily noticed Dr. Harrington watching the Chen Sullivan scholars who had been invited to the gala. Young people who would have been invisible to him a year ago, now representing the future of his institution. Later, as guests mingled over champagne and hors d'oeuvres, Thomas Sullivan found himself in conversation with several curious board members. One of them, a banking executive with a reputation for bluntness, asked, "What I don't understand, Mr. Sullivan, is why you choose to work the land yourself when you could hire people to do it. Is it some kind of hobby?" Thomas smiled, exchanging a knowing glance with his daughter across the room. "No, sir, it's not a hobby. It's a heritage and a future. My hands get dirty because I believe in understanding the work from the ground up." He sipped his drink before adding, "You can't innovate what you don't truly understand, and you can't lead what you haven't experienced." The wisdom in his words resonated with several listeners, including Dr. Harrington, who had approached in time to hear Thomas's response. "A philosophy we would do well to apply to education," Dr. Harrington added, raising his glass slightly in Thomas's direction. A subtle acknowledgement of how much he had learned from the man he had once dismissed. As the evening drew to a close, Lily stood with her parents near the newly unveiled plaque, tracing the letters of their family name, now permanently etched into Westfield's legacy. "Are you happy with how everything turned out?" Catherine asked her daughter softly. Lily looked around at the transformed institution, at Emma deep in conversation with the science department chair about her energy project, at the diverse group of Chen Sullivan scholars who had found a place where their talents were valued, at Dr. Harrington who had learned to see beyond his biases. "Yes," she said with quiet certainty, "this is better than anything I could have imagined when we first came here. Sometimes the best response to judgment isn't just proving them wrong. It's changing the system itself." Thomas wrapped an arm around his daughter's shoulders. "That's my lily flower, always seeing the bigger picture." Outside, beyond the elegant façade of Westfield Academy, stars twinkled over both mansions and farmhouses alike, a reminder that potential and excellence could be found anywhere, if only one had the wisdom to look beyond appearances. 5 years later, the National Education Conference in Washington, D.C. buzzed with activity as educators, policymakers, and innovators gathered to discuss the future of American schooling. The main ballroom of the Grand Meridian Hotel was filled to capacity, with attendees eagerly awaiting the keynote address from Dr. Lily Sullivan, the newly appointed director of the National Rural Education Initiative at just 20 years old, the youngest person ever to hold such a position. In the front row sat her proud parents, Thomas and Catherine Chen Sullivan. Beside them was Dr. Richard Harrington, now retired from Westfield Academy, but serving as a senior advisor to the Chen Sullivan Foundation's educational equity programs. His hair had grown fully white in the years since their first contentious meeting, but his eyes reflected a wisdom and humility that had only deepened with time. "Who would have thought we'd be here 5 years ago?" Thomas whispered to Dr. Harrington as they waited for the program to begin. "Certainly not me," Dr. Harrington replied with a self-deprecating smile. "Though your wife might have had an inkling," Catherine chuckled softly. "I knew Lily was destined for great things, but even I couldn't have predicted how far-reaching the impact would be." The impact she referred to extended far beyond one family or one school. What had begun as a confrontation at Westfield Academy had sparked a national movement to transform elite educational institutions and their admissions practices. The Chen Sullivan model, as it had come to be known, had been implemented at over 200 preparatory schools and 78 universities across the country. As the lights dimmed and the conference moderator approached the podium, screens around the ballroom displayed a simple but powerful title: Beyond Appearances, Recognizing Potential Where Others See Limitations. "Ladies and gentlemen," the moderator announced, "it is my great honor to introduce our keynote speaker. 5 years ago, she was a 15-year-old student whose rejection from a prestigious academy led to a revolution in how we identify and nurture talent in our educational system. Today, her work has opened doors for thousands of students who might otherwise have been overlooked. Please welcome Dr. Lily Sullivan." The audience rose in a standing ovation as Lily walked confidently to the podium. Gone was the nervous teenager clutching a worn portfolio of achievements. In her place stood a poised young woman with the same intelligent eyes, but now carrying the authority of someone whose ideas had changed an entire educational landscape. "Thank you," she began as the applause subsided. "I'm often asked when my interest in educational equity began, and people are usually surprised by my answer. It didn't start when I was accepted to MIT at 16, or when I completed my accelerated doctorate in educational policy. It began on the day I was rejected, when a headmaster looked at my father's calloused hands and decided I didn't belong." Lily glanced at Dr. Harrington, who nodded encouragingly. Their relationship had evolved from adversaries to unlikely allies in the years since that pivotal day. "That rejection turned out to be the greatest gift I could have received," she continued, "because it revealed a systemic problem far bigger than my personal disappointment. It exposed how our institutions often confuse privilege with potential, pedigree with promise, and social polish with intellectual capability." She gestured to slides appearing on the screens, showing data from the initiative's impact over the past 5 years. The numbers tell a compelling story. Since implementing blind admissions processes and active outreach to underrepresented communities, participating institutions have seen a 47% increase in socio-economic diversity, without any decline in academic performance metrics. In fact, graduation rates, research publications, and postgraduate placements have all improved. The audience murmured appreciatively as they absorbed the data. "But statistics only tell part of the story," Lily continued. The real impact is found in individual journeys, like Emma Chen, the mechanic's daughter who accompanied me to that first gala at Westfield, whose sustainable energy system is now being implemented in rural communities across 3 continents. The screen shifted to show Emma, now an accomplished engineer, working alongside local technicians in a remote village, or Miguel Vasquez, one of the first Chen Sullivan scholars, whose agricultural innovations have increased crop yields by 30% in drought-affected regions while reducing water consumption. Another image appeared of Miguel in a flourishing field, demonstrating his irrigation techniques to local farmers. These are the leaders and innovators our society nearly missed because they didn't fit a narrow preconception of what excellence looks like, Lily emphasized. And there are thousands more still waiting to be discovered if we have the courage to look beyond appearances. As Lily continued her address, outlining the next phase of the initiative, the camera panned across the audience. Educational leaders from the nation's most prestigious institutions listened attentively, many taking notes. Representatives from the Department of Education nodded in agreement. Most notably, a delegation of international educators from 12 countries sat together, having come specifically to learn how to implement similar programs in their own countries. In the back of the ballroom, a small group of young people watched with special interest the latest cohort of Chen Sullivan scholars, now representing over 50 schools nationwide. Among them was a 17-year-old boy from Appalachia, whose coal miner father had sacrificed everything to support his son's education, and a young woman from an inner-city neighborhood whose mathematical brilliance had gone unrecognized until a Westfield outreach team visited her school. The question before us today, Lily's voice resonated through the hall, is not whether talent exists in unexpected places. We've proven beyond doubt that it does. The question is whether we have the moral courage to dismantle systems that have historically overlooked that talent, and to build new frameworks that actively seek it out. She paused, looking directly at her parents and Dr. Harrington in the front row. 5 years ago, my mother landed a private jet on a prep school campus to make a point about judgment and assumptions. It was a dramatic gesture that captured attention and started conversations. But the real work happened in the quieter moments that followed, in committee meetings and policy revisions, in outreach programs and mentorship initiatives. It happened when people like Dr. Harrington, she gestured respectfully toward him, had the courage to acknowledge bias and the commitment to address it systematically. Dr. Harrington ducked his head slightly, still humbled by the memory of his initial misjudgment and the extraordinary journey it had initiated. As we move forward with expanding this initiative internationally, Lily continued, I'm reminded of something my father often says about farming. She smiled warmly at Thomas. He says that the most valuable crop isn't what you harvest today, it's what you plant for tomorrow's generation. Thomas beamed with pride as Catherine squeezed his hand. Together, we are planting seeds of opportunity that will bear fruit long after we're gone, Lily concluded. And in doing so, we're creating an educational ecosystem where excellence is recognized in all its diverse forms, whether it arrives in a private jet or a pickup truck. The audience rose in another standing ovation as Lily completed her address. As applause filled the ballroom, Catherine leaned over to Dr. Harrington. Did you ever imagine that day in your office where this journey would lead? She asked. He shook his head, watching as Lily was surrounded by educators eager to speak with her. Never. But I'm grateful every day that your family taught me to see beyond my own limited perspective. Later that evening, the Sullivan family gathered in a private dining room at the hotel, joined by Dr. Harrington and several key members of the initiative. The formal proceedings had concluded, but the work of educational transformation continued in these more intimate settings. The World Bank representative seemed very interested in the global potential of the program, Catherine observed, as servers brought their first course. 12 countries have already committed to pilot programs, Lily confirmed, but implementation will require cultural adaptation in each region. We can't simply export the American model and expect it to work everywhere. Thomas, still more comfortable in work clothes than the suit he wore, smiled at his daughter's global vision. Remember when your biggest concern was getting into Westfield? Now you're changing education systems around the world. All because someone told her she didn't belong, Dr. Harrington added quietly. I've often wondered these past 5 years, how many other Lilies did I overlook during my career? How many brilliant minds did I dismiss because they didn't fit my preconception of what a Westfield student should be? A thoughtful silence fell over the table until Emma, who had flown in specially for the conference, spoke up. Maybe that's the wrong question to focus on, Dr. Harrington. The past can't be changed, but you've helped create a system where those oversights won't happen to the next generation. Dr. Harrington nodded gratefully. Wisdom from another young woman I might once have underestimated. As dinner progressed, the conversation turned to the future, expanding programs, new initiatives, and the cultural shifts still needed in educational institutions worldwide. Throughout the evening, Lily occasionally caught her parents exchanging proud glances, still very much partners in both life and purpose after all these years. When dessert arrived, Catherine raised her glass in a toast to looking beyond appearances, to second chances, and to the extraordinary journey that began with a rejection letter. And a private jet landing, Thomas added with a twinkle in his eye, drawing laughter from around the table. Dr. Harrington raised his glass as well, and to the Sullivan family, who taught an old educator that the most important lessons sometimes come from the students we fail to teach. As the evening drew to a close, Lily stepped away briefly to review her schedule for the following day. From the doorway, she observed the warm conversation continuing among these people who had shaped her path in such different ways. Her brilliant mother, who had made a dramatic stand for fairness. Her wise father, who had taught her the value of honest work. And her former adversary, who had become one of her strongest advocates. What had begun as a personal rejection had transformed into a movement larger than any of them. A reminder that sometimes life's greatest disappointments can lead to its most meaningful contributions. Outside the hotel, the Washington Monument stood illuminated against the night sky, a fitting backdrop to a day dedicated to building new foundations for educational opportunity. Tomorrow, Lily would meet with legislators to discuss expanding the initiative to public school systems nationwide. The day after, she would join a panel at the United Nations on global educational equity. But tonight, watching her parents laughing with the man who had once dismissed her, Lily reflected on how far they had all come from that fateful day when a private jet landed on a prep school campus and changed the course of countless lives. The farmer's daughter had found her place after all, not just at one elite institution, but at the forefront of reimagining education itself. The rolling hills of the Sullivan Research Farm stretched out under the warm summer sunshine, acres of experimental crops arranged in precise patterns that were as beautiful as they were scientifically significant. The property had expanded considerably over the past decade, now encompassing over 2,000 acres of land dedicated to sustainable agriculture research and education. At the center of the property, the original Sullivan farmhouse remained, largely unchanged, a deliberate choice by the family to preserve the roots of their journey, even as their influence had grown globally. Behind it stood state-of-the-art research facilities, dormitories for visiting scholars, and the newly completed Sullivan Institute for Agricultural Innovation. On this particular Saturday morning, a steady stream of vehicles turned onto the long, gravel driveway, luxury sedans and pickup trucks alike, carrying guests from across the country for the Institute's official opening ceremony. Among them was a modest hybrid car driven by the now fully retired Dr. Richard Harrington, his hair thinner but his eyes brighter than they had been during his days as Westfield's headmaster. As he parked among the growing collection of vehicles, Dr. Harrington took a moment to marvel at how different this visit was from his first encounter with the Sullivan family 15 years earlier. Back then, he had dismissed Thomas Sullivan as just a farmer and Lily as unworthy of Westfield's prestigious halls. The profound misjudgment still humbled him. "Richard, you made it," Catherine Chen Sullivan called out, approaching with the same commanding presence she had always possessed, though now her dark hair was elegantly streaked with silver. At 60, she had stepped back from daily operations at Sullivan International Holdings to focus on the family's foundation and educational initiatives. "I wouldn't have missed it," he replied warmly as they exchanged a brief embrace, "though I must admit, I still feel a touch of irony whenever I visit. The memory of my arrogance remains a powerful teacher." Catherine smiled. "The best teachers are those who continue learning themselves. You've certainly proven that over the years." She gestured toward the gathering crowd. "Come, there are many people who'd like to see you." They walked together toward a large outdoor pavilion where chairs had been arranged, facing a ribbon-stretched entrance to the new Institute building. Among the guests were former Chen Sullivan scholars, now accomplished professionals in their own right, alongside university presidents, agricultural ministers from several countries, and rural educators who had implemented programs inspired by the Sullivan model. Near the podium stood Thomas Sullivan, now in his mid-60s but still robust from daily work on the land he loved. Despite the Sullivan family's considerable wealth and global influence, he had maintained his hands-on involvement in agricultural research, believing that innovation required direct engagement with the soil and crops. Beside him was Emma Chen, who had married Lily's cousin 5 years earlier and now served as the Chief Technology Officer for Sullivan International's Renewable Energy Division. "Where's Lily?" Dr. Harrington asked, noticing the absence of the woman who had become the public face of educational equity reform worldwide. Catherine checked her watch with a knowing smile. She should be landing any minute now. As if on cue, the distinctive sound of helicopter blades cutting through the air drew everyone's attention skyward. A sleek black helicopter bearing the Sullivan Institute logo appeared over the tree line, circling once before descending toward a designated landing pad at the edge of the property. "Some things come full circle," Catherine remarked with amusement, though she opted for a helicopter this time instead of a private jet. The crowd watched as the helicopter touched down, and moments later, Dr. Lily Sullivan emerged, now 30 years old and a globally recognized authority on educational access and agricultural education. Following her was a group of international dignitaries, representatives from the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization, education ministers from 3 continents, and most notably, the current U.S. Secretary of Education. "She certainly knows how to make an entrance," Dr. Harrington observed with a chuckle. "Like mother, like daughter." Catherine laughed softly. Actually, it was the Secretary's security detail that required the helicopter transport. Lily would have been happy driving up in her electric truck. She paused, adding more seriously, "But yes, she did inherit my flair for the occasional dramatic gesture when it serves a greater purpose." As Lily led her distinguished guests toward the pavilion, she caught sight of Dr. Harrington and broke into a warm smile, excusing herself momentarily to greet him. "Dr. Harrington," she said, embracing the man who had once dismissed her potential. "Thank you for coming. It means a great deal to have you here today." "The honor is mine," he replied sincerely. "What you've built here is extraordinary, Lily, far beyond anything Westfield could have offered you." Her eyes twinkled. "Perhaps we have you to thank for that, in a roundabout way. Sometimes the best gifts come disguised as rejection." Before he could respond, Thomas approached to indicate that the ceremony was ready to begin. Guests took their seats as Lily made her way to the podium, her presence commanding the attention of the diverse assembly without effort. "Welcome to the Sullivan Institute for Agricultural Innovation," she began, her voice clear and confident. "This facility represents the convergence of two passions that have defined our family's journey: educational opportunity and sustainable agriculture." She gestured to the state-of-the-art building behind her. "Within these walls, scholars from rural communities worldwide will receive advanced training in agricultural science, environmental engineering, and sustainable business practices. Many of them come from backgrounds similar to my own, families with deep connections to the land, but traditionally limited access to elite educational resources." Dr. Harrington listened intently, struck by how the trajectory of Lily's life had incorporated elements from both her parents, Catherine's strategic vision and global influence, combined with Thomas's grounded wisdom and connection to the earth. "What makes this institute unique," Lily continued, "is not just its research facilities or educational programs, but its founding principle: that excellence and innovation can emerge from unexpected sources when we look beyond conventional markers of potential." She glanced meaningfully at Dr. Harrington, who nodded in acknowledgement of the lesson he had learned so profoundly through their connection. 15 years ago, I sat in an office at a prestigious academy, being told that my background as a farmer's daughter made me unsuitable for their hallowed halls." A murmur rippled through the audience. The story had become legendary in educational circles. What followed was not just a personal vindication, but the beginning of a movement to transform how we identify and nurture talent. The Secretary of Education leaned forward with particular interest as Lily continued. "Today, the Chen Sullivan model has been implemented in over 500 educational institutions across 43 countries. More than 12,000 students who might otherwise have been overlooked have received education at elite institutions. But more importantly, those institutions themselves have been transformed by the diverse perspectives these students bring." Lily's gaze swept across the assembled crowd, pausing briefly on familiar faces: Dr. Harrington, her parents, Emma, and former scholars whose lives had been changed by the initiative that began with her rejection. This institute represents the next phase of that vision, not just integrating overlooked students into existing institutions, but creating new centers of excellence that honor diverse forms of knowledge and expertise from the outset. As Lily proceeded to outline the Institute's ambitious research agenda and educational programs, Dr. Harrington found himself reflecting on the extraordinary journey that had brought them all to this moment. What had begun as his worst professional mistake had catalyzed a movement that had transformed countless lives, including his own. After the formal speeches concluded and the ribbon was cut to enthusiastic applause, guests were invited to tour the new facilities. Dr. Harrington found himself walking alongside Thomas Sullivan through laboratories where researchers were developing drought-resistant crops and more efficient irrigation systems. "Your daughter has created something remarkable here," Dr. Harrington observed, as they watched scientists from diverse backgrounds collaborating on an experiment. Thomas nodded, his weathered face creased with pride. "Lily has always understood something essential about both farming and education, that the most valuable growth happens below the surface, unseen, before anything visible emerges." They paused by a window overlooking experimental fields where students from rural communities worldwide were receiving hands-on training from expert agriculturalists. "You know, Richard," Thomas said thoughtfully, "there was a time when I might have harbored resentment toward you for how you treated Lily that day. But looking at all this," he gestured to the Institute and its activities, "I can only feel gratitude for the chain of events you inadvertently set in motion." Dr. Harrington shook his head in wonder. "Your family's capacity for turning obstacles into opportunities continues to astonish me." Later, as the formal events transitioned to a more relaxed reception in the Institute's central atrium, Catherine found herself in conversation with several education ministers eager to implement similar programs in their countries. The key insight, she explained, wasn't just creating pathways for rural students to access elite education. It was recognizing that these students bring valuable perspectives that enhance the institutions themselves. Nearby, Lily circulated among guests, connecting researchers with potential funders and introducing former scholars to government officials who might support their work. Despite her global prominence, she maintained the same approachable warmth that had characterized her even as a teenager facing rejection. As the afternoon progressed, Dr. Harrington eventually found a moment to speak privately with all three Sullivans together, the family that had so profoundly changed his understanding of potential and privilege. "I want you to know," he said with genuine emotion, "that the lesson your family taught me transformed not just my professional perspective, but my personal life as well. I've spent the past decade mentoring students from backgrounds I once would have overlooked, and they have enriched my life immeasurably." Catherine nodded appreciatively. "The most powerful form of education is the kind that changes how we see the world. And sometimes," Thomas added with his characteristic practical wisdom, "the most valuable seeds are those that take the longest to germinate." Lily, who had grown from a rejected applicant to a global leader, smiled at the former headmaster. "Dr. Harrington, I've always believed that your willingness to acknowledge your mistake and work towards systemic change showed more character than if you'd never made the error at all." As the sun began to set over the Sullivan Research Farm, casting golden light across fields where innovation and tradition worked in harmony, guests gradually departed, carrying with them inspiration from what they had witnessed. The Sullivan Institute stood not just as a center for agricultural research, but as a physical manifestation of the principle that had guided the family's journey. That potential could be found in unexpected places if one had the wisdom to look beyond appearances. Dr. Harrington was among the last to leave, pausing at his car to take in the view one final time. The contrast was striking. The humble farmhouse where the Sullivan family had maintained their roots, alongside the cutting-edge institute that would shape agricultural practices globally. As he prepared to drive away, he noticed Lily walking, alone among the experimental crops, seemingly taking a moment of peaceful reflection amidst the day's festivities. She stopped to examine a particular plant, her fingers gently touching its leaves with the same reverence her father had always shown for growing things. In that moment, Dr. Harrington saw the full circle of their journey. The farmer's daughter had never needed Westfield Academy to realize her potential. Rather, it was Westfield and countless other institutions that had needed her vision to realize theirs. He started his car with a sense of profound gratitude for having been part of this remarkable story, one that had begun with a rejection, continued with a private jet landing on a school campus, and culminated in a global movement to recognize excellence in all its diverse forms. The once rejected farmer's daughter had not just found her place in the world, she had created a New world where others like her could thrive. The main auditorium of Westfield Academy was filled to capacity. Students and faculty gathered for a special commemorative ceremony marking the 20th anniversary of the Chen Sullivan Educational Equity Initiative. The once rigidly traditional institution had transformed dramatically over 2 decades, now recognized globally as a pioneer in identifying and nurturing diverse talent. On the wall behind the stage hung portraits of significant figures in the Academy's long history. Among them, added just 5 years earlier, was a striking painting of Dr. Lily Sullivan Chen, her expression both determined and compassionate, qualities that had defined her remarkable career. In the front row sat an elderly Dr. Richard Harrington, now in his 80s, frail in body but still sharp in mind. Beside him was Thomas Sullivan, his once dark hair now completely white, but his posture still strong from a lifetime of physical work despite being in his 70s. The seat reserved for Catherine Chen Sullivan remained empty. She had passed away 3 years earlier after a brief illness, leaving behind a legacy of transformation in both education and sustainable agriculture. The current headmistress of Westfield, Dr. Maya Washington, herself a former Chen Sullivan scholar, approached the podium to begin the ceremony. Distinguished guests, faculty and students, welcome to this special commemoration of what we now simply call the day that changed everything. Appreciative laughter rippled through the audience. 20 years ago, an encounter in the headmaster's office set in motion events that would transform not just Westfield Academy, but educational institutions worldwide. Dr. Washington gestured to Dr. Harrington and Thomas with respect. We are honored to have with us 2 of the central figures in that pivotal moment. Dr. Richard Harrington, whose courage in acknowledging a profound misjudgment set an example of leadership through humility, and Mr. Thomas Sullivan, whose wisdom and integrity have guided the Sullivan Institute's unprecedented impact on sustainable agriculture. The audience applauded warmly as both men nodded in acknowledgement. We had hoped Dr. Lily Sullivan Chen would join us today, Dr. Washington continued, but as many of you know, she was called to an emergency United Nations summit on global education access following the climate migration crisis. However, she has sent a special message to be shared with all of you. The large screen behind her illuminated with Lily's face, now in her early 40s, her features reflecting both her mother's determination and her father's gentle wisdom, though she had formally added her mother's surname to her own after Catherine's passing. She remained simply Lily to those who knew her well. "Greetings to the Westfield community," Lily began, the backdrop behind her suggesting she was speaking from somewhere in Southeast Asia. "I regret that I cannot be with you in person for this meaningful anniversary. 2 decades ago, I sat in the headmaster's office at Westfield Academy as a 15-year-old girl, being told that I didn't belong because of who my father was and where we lived." The auditorium was completely silent as she continued. What followed? My mother's dramatic arrival by private jet, the confrontation that ensued, and the systemic changes that were implemented, has become almost mythological in educational circles. But myths, while inspiring, can obscure the more nuanced truths that matter most. Lily's expression grew thoughtful. The truth is that transformation rarely comes from single dramatic moments, though those moments capture our imagination. Real change comes from the patient, persistent work that follows. The committees formed, the policies rewritten, the mindsets gradually shifted through countless conversations and reconsiderations. In the audience, many of the faculty nodded in recognition of this wisdom. Westfield Academy today bears little resemblance to the institution that rejected me 20 years ago, not just in its more diverse student body or its reformed admissions practices, but in its fundamental understanding of what constitutes excellence and potential. That evolution required the contributions of many people, including Dr. Harrington, whose willingness to learn from his mistakes proved as educational as any curriculum. The camera panned to Dr. Harrington, who lowered his head slightly in humble acknowledgement. As we mark this anniversary, I invite all of you, students, faculty, and administrators, to consider what other biases might still shape our understanding of human potential. What forms of excellence might we still be overlooking? Whose voices might we still be missing? The work of creating truly equitable educational institutions is never complete. It evolves as our understanding deepens. Lily paused, and when she spoke again, her voice carried the emotion of personal loss. My mother, Dr. Catherine Chen Sullivan, did not live to see this 20th anniversary, but her vision continues to guide our work worldwide. She understood that dramatic gestures may catalyze change, but sustained commitment transforms systems. Her private jet landing made headlines, but her patient work in the years that followed made history. Thomas Sullivan wiped a tear from his eye as his daughter spoke of her mother. And my father, Lily continued, her face softening, taught me that wisdom often comes from the most unexpected sources, that hands that work the earth can shape the future as profoundly as those that write policy or manage institutions. His perspective has informed every educational initiative we've developed. The camera panned again to Thomas, who sat with dignity despite the emotion evident on his weathered face. In closing, Lily said, I offer my deepest gratitude to Westfield Academy, not for eventually accepting me, but for being willing to transform itself. The greatest learning institutions are those that never stop learning themselves. As Lily's message concluded, Dr. Washington returned to the podium. Thank you, Dr. Sullivan Chen, for those powerful reflections. She turned to address the gathered audience. Today, we not only commemorate a transformative moment in our institution's history, but formally announce the establishment of the Catherine Chen Sullivan Memorial Scholarship, which will fully fund the education of 50 students annually from rural and agricultural communities worldwide. Applause filled the auditorium as Dr. Washington continued. And now it is my great honor to invite Mr. Thomas Sullivan to unveil the commemorative plaque that will be installed at the entrance to our admissions office. Thomas rose slowly from his seat, his movements deliberate but steady. Dr. Harrington also attempted to stand, but found it difficult with his aging joints. Without hesitation, Thomas offered his arm to the former headmaster who had once dismissed him, a gesture of support between two men whose unlikely friendship had developed over decades of shared purpose. Together, they approached the covered plaque at the side of the stage. Thomas carefully removed the velvet cloth to reveal a beautifully crafted bronze marker bearing an inscription. Look beyond appearances to discover true potential. The Chen Sullivan Initiative began here on April 17, 2025, reminding us that excellence wears many faces and wisdom speaks in many voices. Below the text was an artistic rendering of both rural farmland and a classical academic building, connected by a pathway of light, symbolizing the bridge between worlds that had once seemed separate but were now understood as complementary. Sources of knowledge and innovation. As Thomas and Dr. Harrington stood side by side before the plaque, the elderly former headmaster leaned closer to the microphone. May I add a personal reflection? He asked, his voice thin but clear. Dr. Washington nodded, and the audience quieted once more. 20 years ago, I made the worst professional mistake of my career, Dr. Harrington began candidly. I looked at Thomas Sullivan's calloused hands and rural address, and I failed to see the extraordinary family before me or the remarkable young woman Lily already was. He paused, gathering his thoughts. That failure changed my life, not for the worse as I initially feared, but immeasurably for the better. It taught me that our most deeply held assumptions often limit our ability to recognize potential and excellence in unexpected forms. Thomas placed a supportive hand on Dr. Harrington's shoulder as he continued. In the years since, I've had the privilege of watching Lily Sullivan Chen transform global education. I've seen Thomas's agricultural wisdom integrated into curricula worldwide. And I was honored to call Catherine Chen Sullivan not just a colleague, but a friend until her passing. His voice grew more reflective. If there's one lesson I hope Westfield students today will take from our story, it's this. Be willing to question your assumptions, especially those that seem most natural or obvious to you. True education begins when we recognize how much we don't know, and how much we might learn from those we've been taught not to see. As Dr. Harrington concluded his remarks, the audience rose in a standing ovation, not just for his words, but for the 2 decades of transformation they represented. Later, as the formal ceremony transitioned to a reception in the Academy's Grand Hall, Thomas Sullivan found a quiet moment with Dr. Harrington near a window overlooking the same lacrosse field where Catherine's private jet had landed 20 years earlier. She would have loved today, Thomas said softly, both men knowing he meant Catherine. Dr. Harrington nodded. She had a gift for seeing the potential in moments as well as in people. I suspect she knew even that first day how far-reaching the impact would be. Catherine always played the long game, Thomas agreed with a sad smile. Even at the end, she was thinking decades ahead with her foundation directives. They stood in companionable silence for a moment, 2 men in their twilight. Years reflecting on a shared journey neither could have anticipated. Do you ever wonder, Dr. Harrington asked finally, what would have happened if I had simply admitted Lily that first day? Thomas considered the question carefully. Lily might have received an excellent education here. She might have gone on to great things, but the thousands of other students who've benefited from the initiative, the systemic changes across hundreds of institutions, the global impact? He shook his head. Some seeds need resistance to grow stronger. Across the room, they could see Dr. Washington introducing a group of current Chen Sullivan scholars, young people from farming communities, inner cities, and indigenous territories who represented the living legacy of that pivotal confrontation. Now, 2 decades earlier, I used to think my greatest contribution to education would be maintaining Westfield's traditions, Dr. Harrington reflected. How ironic that my greatest impact came from disrupting them instead. Thomas smiled. That's the nature of growth, in fields and in institutions. Sometimes what seems like disruption is actually renewal. Outside the window, the sun was setting over Westfield Academy, casting long shadows across grounds that had witnessed 2 centuries of history. But it was the events of a single day 20 years ago that had perhaps most profoundly shaped the institution's identity and purpose. The farmer and the headmaster, once antagonists, now allies in their shared commitment to recognizing potential, in all its forms, stood together as living testaments to the power of humility, wisdom, and the courage to transform mistake into opportunity. In educational institutions around the world, similar ceremonies were taking place, commemorating the day a private jet landed on a prep school campus and changed the course of educational history. But here at Westfield, where it all began, the anniversary held special significance, a reminder that sometimes rejection can be the first step on a journey towards something far greater than mere acceptance. And somewhere across the globe, doing the vital work of educational justice, Lily Sullivan Chen carried forward the legacy of that extraordinary day. The farmer's daughter, whose rejection had sparked a revolution in how we recognize and nurture human potential. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.